Brilliant. Thanks, Don. Just checking you can all hear me okay?
Yep, right.
Brilliant. That's great. Okay, yeah, good morning from the UK. Not normally one for kind of worrying about the weather, but today apparently we're going to break our record for temperature. Apparently we're going to get to 41 degrees here today, which is just crazy for us, but I'm sure you're used to that down there. So my talk today, I'm going to kind of talk about some bits and pieces that we've learned from COVID, mainly from the perspective of math support and stat support, but kind of touching upon what we've learned kind of towards maths teaching in general and stats teaching in general, and see if what we can kind of do to take this forward going into the new normal. So Don's obviously given you kind of a quick introduction. Just as I say, for those who haven't kind of seen me before, don't know who I am, completed my PhD in Loughborough so eight or so years ago now. I did a kind of school teaching course after that as well. So I've got experience all the way from kind of secondary school teaching all the way up to university teaching, and that's where my research focus really is. It's looking at kind of improving maths and maths education, kind of from school teaching all the way through to university, and in particular looking at kind of non-mathematicians. I work closely with nurses at Coventry University and do a lot of work there trying to improve their understanding of mathematics. As I say, I'm kind of in charge of kind of sorting a lot of stuff out for the Sigma network in the UK. As Don said, I'm a vice chair now, so kind of do the operational side of things for the network. And organised the CATL-MSOR conference last year, which some of you may have been a part of online. Just as given that we're talking a bit about what we've learned from COVID, my small claim to fame is that I did teach the first nurse to give the first dose of a COVID vaccine. It was here in Coventry, which is quite cool. So yeah, that is my minor claim to fame. And rather pleasingly, the patient is still alive, so I must have done a reasonably good job. Okay, so first thing kind of just to kind of talk about is kind of just some general issues around sort of learning maths and kind of why do we need math support anyway? Why do we need stat support? What's the reason for it? Well, in the UK, there is a kind of generally accepted culture. It's okay to be bad at maths. The amount of times that I'm sitting there in an open day and I hear from parents and from students, and they say, "Oh, I don't need maths," or "I was bad at maths." It's unbelievable, really. And given that a lot of them, when you ask them what course they're doing, it's something that contains maths 90% of the time. It's very worrying. And a lot of students are then saying, "Why do I need to learn this? I'll never need it," particularly at school. That's something we hear a lot of in the UK. But when I dug a little bit deeper, it turns out you have the same issue. So it seems like you've got the same kind of issues down in Australia. All these kind of newspaper cuttings seem to suggest the same thing. So it's not just a UK problem. It seems to be something that's around the world, unfortunately. And of course, this breeds a fear of maths anxiety and or a fear of maths and lack of resilience. So 93% of adults say they have some form of maths anxiety. And a lot of people get very nervous doing maths problems, tend to do maths homework and worry about maths classes being difficult. And recent research has shown that basically those students that need the support are often too afraid to even come and ask for it because they're afraid that they're going to be kind of looking bad in front of their colleagues. So they don't tend to ask for the help. So when we kind of think about mathematicians who come to university to study for mathematics, they tend to not have much math anxiety. And this scale I just drew up is certainly not a scientific scale, but based on experience from kind of looking at who we see in our math support centre in Coventry, this is what you would expect to see. You tend to see mathematicians have good resilience and good kind of basically a lack of anxiety to do with maths, obviously. And then you can go up the scale all the way to nurses who are incredibly anxious and very lacking in resilience. Most of them tend to be older students. They tend to not have done maths for a long while. So they're kind of struggling a lot more. But of course, it's a sliding scale, so we see all sorts and can kind of go all different ways. But there's a lot of research going into anxiety and resilience, and it was really important to do with what we learned from the pandemic as well. So this is part of the reason why I'm mentioning it. But the main thing is that mathematicians use the centres as a social space. So they know that they need the help. They can come and work with their friends and get the support, and a community of practice is established. So we basically see a lot of mathematicians coming into the centre, sharing ideas and working on problems, basically usually through their lunch break as well, kind of using it between their lectures to come and get help and to work together. And this is seen through kind of our visits that we've had to the centre before the pandemic. And you can see those blue lines there represent the students that are doing either maths or engineering, something that has got a high content of mathematics. It is open to everyone in the centre, but as you can see, the majority of people who came before the pandemic, they tended to be people on high maths related courses. They know they need the help, they know they need the support, they're not afraid to come and get it, but not all of them ask questions. They were there to work with their friends, they use it as a social space. And again, this is a big important factor when we think about online support and online teaching going forward. But the non-mathematicians, yes, okay, they've increased in the last few years right in the run up to the pandemic, but many of them come to university and they're underprepared. They're not aware of the content. As I said, they turn up on open days and they think that they don't have to do any maths. And most of them, perhaps being psychologists, for example, don't realize how much maths there is on their course. And they're not kind of aware that they're able to get support. And unfortunately, a lot of them tend to think this. They tend to have this problem, and trying to kind of get over that problem is a big issue. And some of the things we tend to hear in math support about this, they're not mathematicians. They don't need to come to the support centre. They're worried that their lecturer is going to find out. They should be able to do it because it's so basic. They shouldn't need the support. They didn't know it was available. They don't need the support. They hate it. These are the typical kind of comments that we get every time to do with non-mathematicians coming to get support. But when they do get the support, they find that it's incredibly useful. And the issue that we find most, or we did find before the pandemic, was that a lot of students who are non-mathematicians don't come to the centre, but mainly because they don't know where it is, they've not heard of it, or they are anxious. And that's the key. But when they come, they know that it's a really useful place for them to work, and they know that they can get the support, and they know that they can get through all the issues that they're having. And just towards the beginning of the pandemic, we were starting to kind of figure out how to get to these students by going into their lectures, by providing a bit of extra support, by working with the lecturers to bring them into the centre and actually make them realise that it's a place that they can come and get support without kind of being judged or anything like that. But of course, pandemic then hit and we had to change what we were doing. And this kind of leads on to the report that I wrote during the pandemic, based on what happened across the world. So, of course, a lot of places were starting to look at online learning and online support. At Coventry, we were looking at it through the use of our CU Online branch. And I'd worked with them a couple of times to kind of look at our Big Blue Button system that they were using. And luckily, we were able to implement that quite quickly. But many centres around the world felt underprepared. They felt that kind of putting on some online support straight away was difficult, but they planned to do something in the near future. And in the UK, over 94% of institutions surveyed offered some kind of support during the first lockdown period we had here. And then that's kind of been replicated elsewhere, but also many institutions were seeing lower numbers of students coming to their centres online than they would do during normal times. And on average, this was about 116 students, which is what we would typically see in Coventry on a kind of standard weekday morning pre-pandemic. So it was a big drop. And this 116 was across the whole of the period of lockdown in the UK. So there was obviously a big change. And the report kind of talks about what some of those reasons potentially were. So from that report, we actually got some kind of positives and negatives about online learning. And so these are kind of some of the main kind of positives. So first thing was accessibility. So a lot of people found that it was really positive that they could record the sessions. And obviously, this has led to beyond teaching. Now you can record sessions such as this for people to see. And it's really useful because we're now used to that. And people can look back and they don't have to be there all the time. A lot of people said it was easy to focus on one student. So when you're in a big classroom, it's obviously quite difficult to actually kind of support more than one student at a time. So when you've actually kind of forced to do that, you can focus your attention on that one student and give them the better support effectively. Also, the less confident students tended to access the support more, and we'll see kind of some evidence of that shortly. But it shows that when they're online, they tend to prefer that method because there's a bit more anonymity, and they can kind of get the support without feeling that they're being judged. And partly the reason for that is that they don't put the cameras on, so they kind of hide away. Students felt that it was flexible, and perhaps it was safer, as I said, and they didn't need to go to a physical centre. So for a lot of students who are doing distance learning, for example, having that online centre is a big plus, because they can get the support from the comfort of their own home. They don't have to travel in and go to a physical centre. Some of the negatives, well, the first one's obvious. A lot of technical hiccups were reported. Standard things that you would expect when you're trying to do something new online. Mainly to do with broadband. Actually, a lot of people said that they didn't have the broadband to be able to do it. Also, kind of not having the equipment necessarily to be able to support. And some people, because of the fact that the students didn't put the cameras on, felt that they weren't able to kind of support the student in the best way possible, without making them feel abandoned. And this is because the students were kind of left to kind of do their own work, and you could only really ask them, do you understand that? And you couldn't really get a gauge of what's going on. A paper that I read recently describes it as seeing into the whites of their eyes. So you can't see into the whites of their eyes to determine exactly whether they're telling the truth or not, whether they understand it. When you're in person, you can see that. You lose the sense of community. It's difficult to write out solutions, and the students got to have the equipment as well. So this is more so for maths rather than statistics, but for maths, to be able to work kind of, in the same potential way that you would do in person, it requires the student to have some form of writing equipment. So is it fair? A lot of people pointed to the fair access for those that had it and those that didn't. You also need a lot more time for working with each student. And a lot of people felt that they were underprepared because they didn't have enough training in using the systems. And as we said, few students were using the service, and there's that lack of personal touch. So as I said, though, one of the big positives is that the students who wouldn't normally seek the support or wouldn't come and ask for help did actually come for help during the pandemic. And the table at the bottom there shows effectively the same faculties that I showed you before on the graphs a few slides ago for here at Coventry. And if you remember, the EEC students are the ones that came the most, and they're the ones that contained the most maths content in their course. And you'll see that actually during the pandemic, if I highlight the bottom three are those that contain nurses and are our satellite campuses in Scarborough and London in the UK. And you can see that their percentage of engagement has increased quite significantly during 2020 to 21. I haven't found the numbers yet for 21-22 because we're just coming to the end of our academic year. But obviously it's going to be very similar because we've continued our online learning platforms this year, as well as providing the face-to-face. But it shows that maths anxious students obviously feel, or those that are students that are usually more maths anxious, feel that they can use online support more because they're available to, it's available to them from home, and they can hide away a little bit. And the good thing is that we're providing support to distance learners at the same level, which was great. And another thing to mention is that only one person who visited the centre more than once from the nursing courses, I mean, this is, as I say, this is my kind of focus, actually failed their December examinations that year. So those that came and actually used it more than once actually were able to pass their mathematics exams in nursing. So it seems as though that there's been a bit of a crossover. During the pandemic, lots of students who wouldn't normally come and see us came to see us online. And those students that were coming to see us in their droves before the pandemic in person was tending to stay away. So there seems to be a bit of a crossover which we've got to work out. And this is what people are now saying. People seem to be saying that the face-to-face method is the way forward, but with a big but. And that big but is that online support would be provided as a supplementary offering. And some recent work that we've done, which has just been submitted, this some work we've done with our colleagues in Germany, shows that. So you can see that in the UK, over 90% of institutions are planning to do face-to-face operations, but alongside online methods as well. So most people are planning to do a hybrid or are in the process of doing hybrid support, and this hopefully will increase the numbers back up to where they were pre-pandemic. So what we've seen is that online support tends to increase the chances of those who are less inclined to visit in person or have maths anxiety to obtain support. And this is true for one-to-one support and appointments, but not necessarily for groups. And that makes sense. So prior to the pandemic, the way that we managed to get students into the centre was inviting groups and to work with their tutor groups effectively. But we're not seeing that online in the same way. We're seeing more one-to-ones than in groups. It's generally now accepted that stats is easier to teach online than maths. You don't need the specialist equipment to teach stats. And most of the time, stats tends to be just sharing the screen and discussing. So even in person, when you're providing stats support or stats teaching, you're tending to kind of show perhaps say like SPSS or R, and then kind of discussing that next to each other and kind of working together. So it's not particularly different online compared to in person. And there tends to be at the minute a lot more focus on making documents accessible, particularly because we're going into this online age. So we're looking at kind of using screen readers and making them understand mathematical content. So, for example, we've just had a student in our centre that we've given an internship to, looking at turning some of our documents into screen reader accessible documents for our students coming in, and to make sure that everything is up to date and ready to go for the new academic year. So there's a lot of focus on that right now, given the use of online. And unfortunately, the UK though hasn't been able to replicate this social learning of online support and teaching. Other places around the world have, but we haven't, unfortunately. And this is where I think this crossover is coming in. I think that if we can do that, we will then actually be able to get those students that would normally be coming in person to come online and work in groups. That's what we're looking for. So that's kind of like the kind of general overview of math support. This now kind of moves on to kind of more general online maths and stats teaching, and kind of looking at how people have done it. And from what I've found and what I've seen kind of reports and in research, it tends to be, and obviously there are some exceptions here, but in the UK and Ireland, we tend to use Teams and Blackboard Collaborate for teaching, and particularly for kind of big groups. And for Germany and you guys down in Australia, it tends to be Blue Button and Zoom. Now, obviously, we are an exception. We use Big Blue Button in Coventry, but I think we're one of the only universities in the UK that does use that. And what we've seen is that Teams and BB Collaborate tend to be better for kind of one-to-one teaching or large lectures, whereas Big Blue Button and Zoom tends to be better for social learning. Again, it's not always the case, but that seems to be what's happening. But one thing that has emerged recently that could be used that hasn't been used as much as we might think is something called Discord. Now, this was something I was aware of through watching YouTube videos just in my spare time, and watching gamers play. And it's used a lot by the students for gaming. And this is it is a platform that they use for gaming and for chatting while they're doing games. But it's been suggested that this could be a way to provide that social learning space online, because the students are using it, they're aware of it, they know how to use it. And as I say, in Germany, this is where they actually were kind of providing the support. So the students, they realized, were using Discord themselves during the pandemic, and then have actually adapted that to start using it in their own teaching and learning. So perhaps Discord could be a way forward in the future for providing support and for teaching in a social kind of environment rather than a more formal environment. And that way potentially we'll get more students on board and interested, because it's a platform that they're used to. They don't have to learn anything new, and we can take it forward from there. I'll talk a bit more about that towards the end. But of course, it's not just about teaching, it's also about assessment. So some of the platforms we tend to use, or the most popular platforms that we tend to use, and I know you've got to talk about this tomorrow, first thing. The first one is Numbers. And this is one of the first platforms that I ever came across. I remember learning about it sort of pretty much in my first year at Coventry. And the guys in Newcastle creating this and giving us a training session. I think it's a fantastic platform. It's very, very good for creating mathematical questions. They've got it so that it can randomize things and come up with the correct answers every time based on the randomization. You just put in some basic code and that then creates the questions and actually creates the right variables for you in terms of the answers. So some of the positives of it are that it does kind of render the mathematics beautifully because it uses LaTeX and LaTeX code. And it's perfect for formative assessment. I think it's great for that. We use it a lot in Centre for providing our students with practice tests and giving them a chance to use basically an infinite bank of questions. So I think it's a really useful tool for that. However, there is no system to see the results. It has to be integrated. So if a student can go onto the Numbers platform itself and do the questions, they will see the results, but you can't then see the results yourself. It has to be integrated into a system that accounts for it. So for example, we used to integrate it into our old platform Moodle, and then we could see the results through a very kind of complex Excel spreadsheet, but we could see it. So it can be quite difficult to integrate, and you may require some coding knowledge to be able to do that. So in terms of actually implementing it, it can be quite difficult, but the system itself is fantastic. The second method is a less well known, and I think we've used it at Coventry as a kind of trial to see whether it's going to work, and that's WiseFlow. So this thing is it's called WiseFlow, also known as UniWise, and this platform creates basically an exam environment online. It's got a lockdown browser, which again is something that Numbers doesn't have. You'd have to talk to your IT services department to sort that out. But for this, it has an automatic lockdown browser. Again, it uses LaTeX. It gives you fantastic statistics in terms of what the students have answered, how they've answered, for example, and again uses LaTeX to render the mathematics. They've just implemented a new variable option, so now it's starting to kind of rival Numbers in terms of being able to create random questions. But it has the bonus is that it has its own dedicated assessment platform. And we've used it for our diagnostic tests for the last 2 years while they were online, and it was absolutely fantastic. It was very, very useful for us. Unfortunately, the universities decided not to go with it, so we're going to have to learn another new platform for September. But while we used it, it was fantastic. The downsides to it are that it's not intuitively obvious for the students. So what we found is a lot of students miss the submit button in the top right hand corner. So there can be some issues with them actually not submitting their work. It can be difficult to log in online if you give them the wrong email address, which is particularly difficult when you've got, for example, when they're enrolling, they might have the wrong email address to start with. And of course, that means that they struggle to log in. We found it's better actually if you can take it in a room rather than at home, but it does work at home. But it also doesn't work on some browsers. So for example, it doesn't work on Edge or Safari. So you have to use Google Chrome or Firefox to be able to use it. So again, there are some downsides, but I really enjoyed using WiseFlow, and I think it's a very useful platform for doing assessment in maths. And just some others that I know about but haven't actually used myself. So there's BB Collaborate. Again, a lot of places in the UK, they use Blackboard as their kind of virtual learning environment. So this integrates really nicely into their learning environment. We had Moodle, so you can use Moodle as well. It's got its own quizzes, but that's not particularly good because the maths tends to have to be a picture if you're going to put that in, because it doesn't understand kind of maths code, and you can't put variable values in. So you're stuck with the single question. And then there's Inspira, which is the one we're actually moving to in September. This is the one we're going to have to learn about. So I'll report back in a year's time on how Inspira works and how useful it is, because this is the way that Coventry is going now, and it's a new platform to me. So we'll see how it goes. But of course, there is talk at the minute that assessment might not actually be needed. So in the UK, a lot of people are actually considering kind of not having in-person examinations anymore. So we didn't have any examinations for the last 2 years of GCSE and A-level, which are the two kind of exams that our students sit at 16 and 18 before they come to university. So that there is kind of the talk about getting rid of them, and I know that there is talk of that down where you are as well. But this isn't an old thing, a new thing. Sorry, it's been around for a while. So you can see here the date of this this article from the Times in the UK was 2011. So this isn't a new idea. People have been kind of discussing this for a while, but the pandemic's kind of brought it forward. So as I said, in the UK, the students that we've had coming to university over the last couple of years didn't have to take formal assessment. We had teacher assessed grades last year, and the year before that, there was what's called the triple lock system, which the government brought in, which basically gave them 3 options to assess their students. They could either use past grades, they could use examinations that they'd used recently, or they could look at kind of work that they'd done over the course of the period of their kind of learning. Whereas last year, they were assessed up to the point that they'd learned. So they actually didn't do the whole, for example, of the A-level course. So some topics were missed out, and they were assessed on the topics that they were kind of taught. But again, this wasn't formal assessment. This was just based on teachers' assessment of the grades that they think they should get. So in 2020, we found that 14.3% of all students entering UK universities achieved an A-star grade, which is the top grade in at least one of their A-levels. And this was compared to 8% in 2019. But last year, this had jumped to 19.1%. And in mathematics specifically, this was 28.7%. Compared to 23.8 and 15.9% in 2020 and 2019. So a massive jump. And one of the reasons we think for that is because teachers felt that they were under pressure to inflate their judgments. And a recent paper has shown this. So the teachers were effectively assessing that, on their own. They had no kind of control, but they felt that they had to kind of inflate some of the grades, perhaps, to kind of make sure that the students were able to enter kind of the universities and to make effectively look good, to continue the upward trend of positive A-level results. And of course, the problem was half of these teachers said that they were underprepared to support the learning online. So these students who entered in 2021, who had 2 years or almost 2 years of disrupted learning, didn't have teachers that were prepared to support them and teach them during that period, and yet their values of A-stars, the top grade, had increased by well over 10% since 2019. So do we need to keep assessment? Well, this is something that I've been working on recently, which is looking at diagnostic test scores that we have at Coventry. And I've just popped this line in here to compare 2021 to kind of previous years. And you can see that actually they performed this year at the same kind of level as 2011, so a decade ago. So these students coming into Coventry University, despite having better A-level grades on the diagnostic test, are actually performing at the same level as they did 10 years ago, which is quite shocking, and actually significantly worse than last year. So just some kind of key points from this graph. So here in 2004, we had the publication of the Adrian Smith report in the UK on making mathematics count. And this basically said that we needed reform in A-levels, and you can see the obvious reason why. There'd been a big dip in kind of the test score there, and there needs to be more focus on STEM subjects at A-level. Since then, Coventry started to recruit better students, so you'd expect better results, which is what we got. And then the government introduced reforms to A-levels, so they became linear and not modular. And the first cohort arrived in 2019. And this is something what's called the sawtooth effect. So what kind of happens is when you bring in new assessment methods, you tend to see that the first cohort that comes in tends to be kind of worse than what was there previously, but then it bounces back up. Now, of course, this is slightly different because 2020 and 21, we had the pandemic. So we haven't actually seen whether there was a bounce or not from these new A-levels. But you can see that now in 2021, we've had teacher assessed grades, not actually formal assessment. And not all of the A-level content is covered, as I said. And so basically from this, I started to look at whether grades have been inflated. Because of course, there was a suggestion, it looks like they have been. And we created a model to kind of predict the probability being given an A star. So what you can see here is the diagnostic test score from 1 to 50, and the probability that at a particular score, a student from that particular cohort was awarded an A star or an A, based on various factors. And you can see, for example, so I've taken here the example of 41 out of 50. So the probability of having received an A star at A level has increased. A score of 41 out of 50 results in a 10% increase from 2020 and a 13% increase from 2019. So in other words, in 2021, you were more likely to have been given a top grade despite a poorer diagnostic test performance. So this is suggesting that perhaps there was some form of inflation. And it's not just for these students who arrived in 2021. If we look at this graph now, this graph kind of shows that all the students who appeared kind of pre-pandemic are below the pandemic lines. So the pandemic lines are the blue lines and the dotted, so the blue line at the top, the dotted blue line, and the first black line there, they are the pandemic students. And then the other lines are the students that had qualifications pre-pandemic. So this idea that the probability of them being given a higher grade than they perhaps should have been works across the whole of the pandemic period, but it's more pronounced in 2021. So I've just submitted this for a paper, so hopefully this will come out in a few months' time. But it's very interesting. It's suggesting that actually there was a bit of grade inflation in the UK, and therefore, do we need assessment? I'll leave that as an open question to you to think about. And also, so this kind of did some work looking at kind of what's going on down with you guys in Australia. So you were looking kind of moving towards online assessment, and one of the kind of the big things that came up is that there's a concern that there's a lot of cheating going on, and I have to say that's something that we noticed here in the UK as well. So one of the problems with the diagnostic test, for example, that we had online, we found that because it was at home, it seemed as though some students might have been taking breaks, working together, not taking it seriously, that kind of thing in 2020. Better in 2021 because we had a lot more control and we had a lot of students actually take the test in person on campus. But it is a big problem. And it's not just a problem for assessment, it's actually a problem for math support as well. So we had to make sure that when we were providing our online support, during the assessment period, we could only provide one-to-one support, because we knew that students would actually go in, because their assessments were timed, they would go in, one person would be the guinea pig, download the exam, and then another person would come into the math support center and say, I need some help with this question, and get the answer from someone online that way. So we had to make sure it was a one-to-one appointment during the exam period, no kind of open access online, and make sure that they booked 24 hours in advance with the topic that they were going to ask us about, to prevent the cheating. So this is a big problem. This is something we're going to have to think about going forward, and I'm not sure that we have a good solution yet, particularly if, for example, there is another pandemic. How are we going to put that in place going forward? So we do need to kind of consider this and how it's going to work. So kind of to conclude here, so what will it look like in the new normal? So I think it's pretty obvious that hybrid is here to stay. It seems as though most people prefer in-person teaching. They think it's the best way to do it, but there are some good positives to online learning and teaching in mathematics and statistics, particularly with statistics. But overall, yeah, there is some positives to take online. But we need to adapt, improve, and reform to make sure it's as good as what we offer in person. There is a question of how we support students with mathematics online when they don't have access to equipment. So particularly, with Coventry, we have a way of providing our students with some equipment and some books, but we can't provide everyone with that equipment. So how do we get around this in future? How do we provide the support to those that don't have the equipment to work on screen, for example? How are we going to do this? That's a question that we need to answer. Also, a lot of work has been focused on what teachers and practitioners think, and what lecturers think about kind of the teaching and learning mathematics online. But not much has been done on students. And there are a few bits, but it's slowly increasing. So we need to kind of look at what students think, and my PhD student is actually looking at that and creating a framework based on that and what the practitioners think. And this is coming next year. So hopefully we'll know exactly what the students were thinking during the pandemic, what they were doing, how they were working, and we can use that to go forward. The other big question is, can we replicate that social aspect? As I said right at the start, it's a big thing. It's a big thing for those students that tend to use mathematics support in person, for example. So we need to be able to replicate that. And as we said, one option is to kind of use a Discord server. And I think what we tend to think is that we need a one size fits all. So we need to create, if we're going to do this, we think we need to create a Discord server that all the students will come into, and they'll abandon their original Discord servers and work with us in our own Discord servers. And I don't think that's going to be the case. Talking to students and working with people who are kind of interested in this and know about this, they suggest that's not going to work. What we need to do is actually go the other way and actually have it available and go into what they have already to say, we're here, do you need any help? And do it that way. So we need kind of bottom up approach rather than kind of a one size fits all. And I think this is something that we have an issue with in maths education sometimes, is that we tend to think that we need to find a solution that works for everyone. And we need to perhaps start thinking about solutions that fit certain groups and work for certain people. And this is one thing that we can do. So kind of looking at that bottom up approach and going into what exists for particular students. So for example, working with computer science students who are going to use Discord, mathematicians, engineers, they use Discord a lot. Nurses probably aren't. This probably isn't going to work for nurses, for example. So we need to kind of work with the students that use this, and then think about another way of working with the other students. And then, as I said, the importance of social learning cannot be underestimated. I've submitted a talk for Kettle MSOR, so if you're going to be there, either virtually, well, unfortunately it's not going to be virtual this year, you have to be there in person. But I'm going to be doing a talk hopefully there that talks about the importance and how much it actually impacts on student attendance. We've done some work over the last year on looking at, since the pandemic, does the social aspect actually have a big impact? And I can kind of give you a spoiler, and yes, it does. So it's a very important thing, and it's something that we can't underestimate. And the final thing, is there an accepted best practice? I don't think there is yet, but we are improving, and I think everything is getting better, and I think we are learning a lot from kind of what we've done. I think we were thrust into this situation and had to do the best that we could, but it actually meant that we could learn a lot more going forward under that pressurized situation. And now we've got a bit of time to think about it and work on it. I think we can find something that will work and provide the same service that we would provide in person. So that's it from me. I'm more than happy to take any questions. Thank you very much for listening, and yeah, thank you very much.